They both smiled when I walked in, one out of habit, one out of trouble. Elara's smile was the habit. A practiced, graceful curve of her lips as she looked up from the ledger, the kind of greeting she gave every customer who stepped into her quiet little bookshop. It was a beautiful smile, but it lived in her eyes for only a second before fading, leaving them their usual, calm shade of gray. My smile was the trouble. I couldn't help it. It felt too wide, too obvious on my face, a reflexive reaction to the sight of her that I had no hope of controlling. I saw the moment she registered the difference. Her own smile didn't falter, but it shifted. The skin around her eyes tightened, just a fraction. A silent question. Just returning this, I said, my voice too loud for the hushed space between the tall, dusty shelves. I placed the novel on the counter. The unbearable lightness of being her copy. Did you like it? She asked, her fingers brushing the cover. Her nails were short, unpainted. I didn't want it to end. It was the truest thing I'd said all week. A soft huff of air, almost a laugh, escaped her. That's the mark of a good book. Or a good recommendation, I said, and immediately wanted to claw the words back. Too eager. Too much. Her gaze dropped to the book, then lifted to mine again, holding it. The shop was silent, save for the slow, rhythmic tick of the old clock above the door. It was a silence that felt heavy, full of the words we never said. I could smell the scent of old paper and the faint, clean fragrance of her soap, bergamot, and something like rain. Her hand rested on the counter. Mine was close, too close. The space between our little fingers could have been measured in heartbeats. I watched her gaze flicker down to that narrow gap, then back to my face. She didn't move her hand away. There's another one by him, she said, her voice lower now, a near whisper that was just for us. A slower burn. But the payoff. She trailed off, her teeth catching her bottom lip for a fleeting second. It's worth it. Yes, I thought. Please. Tell me about the slow burn. Tell me about the payoff. But all I did was nod, my throat too tight for words. She finally moved, turning toward the philosophy section in the back. Her shoulder brushed my arm as she passed. A spark, a jolt of pure lightning. She didn't apologize, didn't acknowledge it. She just walked, and I stood there, paralyzed by the ghost of that contact. I followed her, of course. I always did. The narrow aisle was dim, lit by a single, weak lamp. She reached for a book on a high shelf, the hem of her sweater riding up, revealing a sliver of skin on her lower back. I stared at that vulnerable, pale strip of her. I had the insane, overwhelming urge to press my thumb there, to feel the warmth of her, to see if she would startle or lean into the touch. She found the book and turned, catching me staring. Her eyes widened, not with anger, but with a sudden, startling awareness. The air left the room. The clock stopped ticking. She was close enough that I could see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the pulse beating at the base of her throat. And then the bell above the shop door jangled, harsh and invasive. The spell shattered. Her expression smoothed over into that practiced, polite mask, her gaze shifting to look past my shoulder. I'll be right with you, she called out, her voice bright and customer service clean. But she didn't move. She held my gaze for 1 second more, her eyes holding a silent, shared confession in the dim light, before she stepped around me, leaving me alone in the aisle with the scent of her and the echo of the door. I started spending my afternoons in the shop, claiming a worn armchair in the poetry corner. I told myself it was for the quiet, a place to read away from my loud, share-house kitchen. A lie so thin it was transparent, even to me. Elara never commented on my new routine. But she began leaving a second mug of coffee on the small table beside my chair. She never asked if I wanted one. She just placed it there, steam curling into the quiet air, and walked away without a word. It was always perfect, black, 1 sugar, just how I'd taken it once, weeks ago. She remembered. That was the thing about her. She noticed everything. The way I'd dog-ear a page instead of using a bookmark. The specific day of the week I'd come in. The way my shoulders would tense when I talked about my father's calls, his endless, polite inquiries about my 5-year plan. She'd watch me from behind the counter, her gaze a physical weight, and I'd feel both exposed and, impossibly, seen. "He means well," she said one afternoon, her voice soft. She was reshelving books nearby. It was the first time she'd acknowledged the one-sided conversations I had on my phone in the alley outside. "Does he?" I asked, the bitterness in my voice surprising me. "Or does he just want a version of me that's easier to understand?" She paused, a heavy hardback in her hands. "My ex-husband had a 10-year plan, laminated. He found my lack of one chaotic." She said it lightly, but her knuckles were white on the book's spine. "He was right, of course. This," she gestured vaguely at the shop, the quiet chaos of stories. "This isn't much of a plan. It's a good place to be," I said, my voice low. "To wait." Her eyes met mine. "Wait for what?" The unspoken question hung between us. Then she was beside my chair, reaching for my empty mug. Her fingers brushed against mine. A simple, accidental touch. But it wasn't. We both froze. Her breath hitched, a tiny, sharp sound in the stillness. I could feel the warmth of her skin, the faint tremor in her hand. I turned my palm up, just a fraction, letting her fingers rest more fully against mine. It was an invitation, a surrender. For a long, suspended moment, she didn't pull away. Her gaze dropped to our touching hands, then back to my face. Her expression was a war of caution and a deep, resonant longing. The air crackled, charged with everything we hadn't said, every glance, every silent coffee left for me. She was the first to break. She withdrew her hand, clutching the mug like a shield. But she didn't step back. She just stood there, close enough that I could see the rapid flutter of her pulse in her throat, her breath a soft, warm brush against my cheek. The space between us was no longer empty. It was electric, alive with the truth we were both too afraid to name. The bell above the door chimed, a cheerful, mundane sound that sliced through the tension like a knife. Elara flinched back as if burned, putting a full 3 feet between us. Her hand flew to her throat, smoothing her sweater, a gesture so tellingly nervous it felt like a confession. "Elara! There you are!" A woman our age, her age, breezed in, all designer yoga pants and a loud, friendly voice. She didn't even glance my way, tucked away in my corner. I became part of the furniture, invisible. "I was just telling Mark," the woman continued, "that you simply have to come to dinner on Saturday. The Andersons will be there, and you know David's been asking about you." I stared down at my book, the words a blur. David. The Andersons. A whole world of people who knew a version of Elara I never would. A world where I was a kid in a chair, a customer, a ghost. Elara's laugh was a brittle, social sound. "Oh, Sarah, I'm not sure, nonsense. It's been too long." Sarah's gaze finally swept the shop and landed on me. Her smile didn't waver, but it became polite, distant. "See? It's quiet. You can close up early." I felt Elara's eyes on me, a silent, desperate plea. I kept my head down, my jaw tight. "I'll check my calendar," Elara murmured. After a few more minutes of pressured chatter, Sarah left, the bell jangling another goodbye. The silence she left behind was thick and heavy with everything she'd brought in with her: judgment, expectation, a life of appropriate dinners and appropriate men. Elara didn't move from behind the counter. I finally looked up. Her face was pale. "I should go," I said, my voice rough. "Yes." The word was a whisper. But neither of us moved. The space between the counter and my chair felt like a chasm. Then she walked out from behind it, stopping in the middle of the room. An invitation. A challenge. I stood and went to her. We were alone in the dimming light of the shop, two fools standing in the wreckage of a moment. I'm old enough to be your," she couldn't finish. The shame was a living thing on her face. "You're just you," I said, the words torn from me. "And I'm just me. And this," I gestured between us, my hand trembling. This is the only thing that has felt real in years. Her resolve crumbled. A small, broken sound escaped her, and she stepped forward, closing the distance. She didn't kiss me. Instead, she pressed her forehead against my shoulder, her body leaning into mine, her hands fisting in the fabric of my jacket. It was an embrace of utter exhaustion and surrender. I wrapped my arms around her, holding her tight, feeling the frantic beat of her heart against my chest. We stood like that in the middle of the silent shop, clinging to each other as the world outside tried to pull us apart, closer than we had ever been, and more terrified than we had ever been. She didn't pull away. She melted. Her body went pliant against mine, her forehead still pressed into my shoulder, her fists unclenching to flatten against my chest. I could feel the frantic, bird-like beat of her heart through my layers of clothing. We stood like that for a long time, just breathing each other in, the silence a sanctuary we had built for ourselves. "This is a terrible idea," she whispered into my jacket, her voice muffled, raw. "I know. People will talk. Let them." She finally lifted her head. Her eyes were glistening, but she wasn't crying. She was just full of a feeling too vast to contain. I brought a hand up, my movements slow, giving her every chance to retreat. She watched me, unblinking, as I brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek. My thumb traced the delicate line of her jaw. Her skin was impossibly soft. A shudder ran through her. "You're so young," she breathed, but it was a lament, not a rejection. "And you're so beautiful," I countered, my voice low, rasping with a need I'd held back for months. "And you're so lonely." "And so am I." Her eyes closed at the word. Lonely. It was the truth we'd both been circling. The quiet, empty apartments, the hollow social engagements, the way a book was a better companion than most people. We'd both been living in a silent, aching vacuum, and in this dusty shop, we had found the one person who made the silence feel peaceful instead of empty. I leaned in, my lips close to her ear. I could feel the warmth of her, smell the rain and bergamot scent of her skin. "Elara," I whispered. Just her name. A question. A plea. A confession. That was the breaking point. Her eyes flew open, meeting mine with a startling, fierce intensity. All the hesitation, the fear, the shame, it was still there, but it was being burned away by something hotter, something undeniable. Her gaze dropped to my lips. Her hand came up and curled around the back of my neck, pulling my head down. Her breath hitched, a soft, willing sound. Our lips were a hair's breadth apart. I could feel the ghost of her touch, the promise of her. The world had narrowed to this single, suspended point of almost. And then the shop phone rang, shrill and relentless, shattering the moment to pieces. The phone screamed into the silence between us. We jerked apart as if electrocuted. The spell wasn't just broken, it was shattered. Elara stared at me, her eyes wide with a kind of terror, her lips still parted from the kiss that hadn't happened. The second ring. The third. On the fourth ring, her professional autopilot engaged. She turned and walked to the counter, her movements stiff. "Elara's books," she answered, her voice strained too high. I stood rooted to the spot, my skin buzzing, the phantom feel of her body against mine still burning. I watched her back as she listened. Her shoulders, which had been soft in my arms moments ago, were now a rigid line of tension. "No, Sarah, it's fine," she said, pinching the bridge of her nose. A pause. "Yes, I heard you. Saturday. David." She said the name like it was a foreign, bitter object on her tongue. She listened again, her free hand gripping the edge of the counter until her knuckles were white. "No, he's just a customer. A regular." "It's not." My heart plummeted. "A customer. A regular." The words were a deliberate ice bath. She was erasing what had just happened, sanitizing it for Sarah's consumption. The intimacy we'd shared was being reduced to a transaction. She hung up the phone but didn't turn around. The silence that followed was heavier, more damning than before. "You should go," she said, her voice hollow, defeated. I'm not just a customer, Elara. The words came out harder than I intended. She finally turned. The war was back in her eyes, but now shame was winning. What are you, then? Tell me. What is this? She gestured wildly between us. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like a lonely woman about to make a spectacular mistake that everyone in her life will see coming from a mile away. The cruelty in her words was a shield. I could see it. I took a step forward. Then another, until I was close enough to see the tremor in her lower lip. I'm the one who can't stop thinking about you, I said, my voice low and raw. I'm the one who stands outside this shop sometimes after you've closed, just looking at the light in your upstairs window. I'm the one who's obsessed. I hadn't meant to say it, to give the feeling a name so dangerous. But it was out now, hanging in the air between us, real and undeniable. She didn't flinch. She just stared at me, her breath coming in shallow pants. My confession hadn't repelled her. It had met hers in the middle. The fear in her eyes was now mixed with a terrifying, mirrored understanding. She reached out, her fingers brushing against my hand. Not an accident this time. A choice. A silent answer to my confession. Then you're in trouble, she whispered. And so am I. She turned and walked towards the back room, leaving the door open behind her. An invitation. A point of no return. My feet moved before my mind could catch up, following her into the dimness. The back room was a small, chaotic space, smelling of ink, dusty carpet, and her. She stood in the center, her back to me, her arms wrapped around herself as if holding her own pieces together. I closed the door. The click of the latch was the loudest sound in the world. It sealed us in. No more interruptions. No more outside world. She turned to face me. The fight was gone from her eyes, replaced by a raw, terrifying vulnerability. Say it again, she whispered. I'm obsessed, I repeated, the words a relief and a condemnation. I took a step forward. The space between us crackled. I think about the way you hold a pen. The sound of your laugh when it's real, not the one you use for customers. I think about what it would feel like to touch you without pretending it's an accident. Another step. I was close enough now to feel the heat from her body, to see the pulse hammering at the base of her throat. This is insane. She breathed, but she was leaning into the space between us, her head tilting back to hold my gaze. I know. My life, it's set. It's quiet. My life was quiet before I walked in here. I said. It was quiet, and it was empty. A tear escaped, tracing a path down her cheek. I didn't wipe it away. I watched it, a testament to the war inside her. Her hand came up, her fingers hovering near my face, not quite touching. I'm afraid, she admitted, the confession a shattered whisper. Of me? Of this. Of how much I want it. Of how I'll survive when it ends. That was it. The core of it. Not the age, not the gossip, but the certain, devastating heartbreak that logic dictated was waiting for us. The one that got away, before we'd even had each other. I closed the final distance. My body didn't touch hers, but I felt her everywhere. The air was thick with the scent of her, the sound of her ragged breathing. Then don't think about the end, I murmured, my lips inches from hers. Think about now. Her resolve broke. A small, desperate sound escaped her throat, and her hand finally made contact, cupping my jaw. Her touch was electric, searing. Her eyes searched mine, looking for one last reason to stop. She didn't find it. She rose onto her toes, her other hand tangling in my hair, and pulled my mouth down to hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a confession. A surrender. A release of months of longing and silence and fear. It was messy and raw and perfect, and in that single, world-ending moment, we understood each other completely. The kiss ended, but we didn't pull apart. Our foreheads rested together, our breath mingling in the quiet, dusty room. The world outside, Sarah's dinner parties, David, my father's plans, it all felt like a distant, fading dream. So, she whispered, her voice husky. That happened? A laugh, rough with emotion, escaped me. Yeah. It did. I felt her smile against my cheek. She finally leaned back, just enough to look at me. Her eyes were clear now, the gray of a calm sea after a storm. The fear was still there, a faint shadow in their depths, but it was no longer in control. People will still talk, she said, but the weight was gone from the words. It was just a fact, no longer a barrier. Let them, I said, brushing a thumb over her kiss-swollen lips. They were always going to talk about something. She caught my hand, lacing her fingers through mine. The fit was perfect. It felt like finding a part of myself I hadn't known was missing. She led me to a worn, threadbare sofa tucked between towering stacks of books. We sat, not speaking, her head finding its place on my shoulder, my arm wrapping around her. I pressed a kiss into her hair. It's not going to be easy, she murmured, her body relaxing against mine for the first time since I'd known her. Nothing real ever is. We sat like that as the last of the daylight faded from the single high window, painting the dust motes in gold. There were no more grand confessions, no promises about a future we couldn't predict. There was just this, the solid warmth of her beside me, the steady rhythm of her breathing, the quiet understanding that we had chosen each other, despite the trouble, because of the trouble. The silence was no longer empty. It was full. It was everything. Did you feel the slow burn? What kind of stories would you like to hear next? Let us know in the comments.